I grew up in El Monte, and that really it can't mean much except to people who've lived here in the area. But
Right, right.
it really,
It's in California for people who don't know.
yeah, I'm trying to find a word that's appropriate, but it was kind of a crappy little town full of troublemakers and kind of had a reputation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and my mom had grown up in World War II Germany. She was born in 28, and the war ended when she was 17. And so she had two children before she met my dad. And my dad was this good-looking, buff Latin kind of guy, and she's thinking, oh, like Greeks and Spaniards, you know. And my mom was so uncharacteristically romantic for a German, because Germans aren't like that, but my mom was.
Yeah.
And she didn't realize, well, yeah, he's so buff because he just did 5 years in the pen and was lifting weights. And he was an alcoholic and an addict, and I think maybe for better, he wasn't around that much, you know. And she had several nervous breakdowns where she was institutionalized because, you know, at the end of that war, she was a wreck. And so that's
she met your father here or in Germany?
Yeah, here in El Monte.
So your other siblings there, were they born in Germany or here?
They were, my brother, I think, was born in Canada.
Okay.
With her first husband, and then my sister might have been here with her first husband, but they both were the children of her first marriage.
Okay. And did you guys grow up together, the siblings?
Oh yeah. We never thought of, you know, half siblings. We were just brother and sisters.
Okay. Was your mom spiritual at all?
Not really. She was a wreck. You know, I mean, she was. Well, I don't have memories before adolescence, and thank God. But my sister remembers everything. So when she tells me stories, I'm like, wow, I'm glad I don't remember any of this.
Yeah.
But no, but she did at one point encounter the Mormons, and they're amazing people. I mean, because she was alone with 3 kids, she couldn't drive. She was a wreck, and they did wonderful things for her. A wonderful support system, great people. And so I was pretty young then, so I kind of grew up in the Mormon church, where my brother and sister didn't so much. They were maybe a little bit older than me, you know, when she got there. But
what's the Mormon church doing in El Monte?
It's everywhere.
Are they everywhere?
They're everywhere.
I don't see them come around anymore. When I grew up in Santa Monica, I used to see them come around.
I don't know if you remember. I haven't
seen a Mormon knock on a door since, 1997.
Well, actually, I think Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses do very well in Catholic areas. And that's where you very often see them, because, it's not uncommon that Hispanic Catholics kind of have the form of ritual and religion, but don't really participate sincerely, or, it's just kind of like, I'm a Catholic and I'll go to mass, but they don't understand anything about the religion. They're not real avid about it in many cases. And so say you're in that context and you have this desire for something more, for better understanding, for something more committed and involved, and up walk the JWs or the Mormons, and they're going to pull like the really zealous, ignorant ones out and take them. So
yeah,
I think
were they just lending a helping hand, or were they also preaching and trying to?
Oh, of course,
proselytize.
Yes, okay. Of course they were proselytizing.
Okay,
but I mean, they have the thing like in the Mormon Church, they have Deseret Industries. They make and can all their own food products. There's no hungry Mormons. They feed their own. They don't, they didn't have to go to the state. Like, here's, food, and here's groups of women to help the women learn how to do domestic things back then, called Relief Society. And it was, it's just a wonderful organization.
So did you actually go to their church or?
Oh yeah,
services?
I grew up in it. Yeah.
Okay. And what was that like? Did it feel normal, looking back, or?
I guess kind of, but there was a point when I started reaching into my teenage years. There was a belief of pre-existence in Mormonism, if you know that, but like the pre-existence of souls. So we all live with God in his spiritual planet, and then we come here to get bodies. And I remembered there was a teaching that you choose where you were going to come and be born. And I was like, this home in El Monte on welfare and all this, I think I would have maybe been a Rockefeller. I don't think I would have picked this. And honestly, that was a huge issue to me because, I hated my life. I hated this world. And it was like, and you're saying I chose this? Are you crazy? And
how did they even answer that?
Yeah.
That's kind of been the most common question. No, I wouldn't have chosen this.
No. So, I mean, then there came a point when I was approaching towards, I don't know, 15 or 16. You start looking ahead that there's a mission that you go on when you turn 19, I think, for 2 years. And it was like no sex and no drugs and something for 2 years while you're on this mission. And I was like, no, I think I'm done. And and from there I became an atheist, what I considered myself at the time an atheist, what I would call myself looking back, a God-hating atheist, which is pretty ironic, but I think it's the case for many people that there's not even an acknowledgement of this, that you really do have a hatred for God that you claim you don't believe exists, but you're really mad at him for things in your world.
Do you think that's all atheists are like that, or just a sub kind of?
Yeah, I think it's a subset.
Yeah. Well, why were you like that at the time?
I hated this world. I hated my life. I hated the suffering I saw around me and the suffering within me, the torment I was going through the teenage years. And I used to say, if this is what God could do, I could certainly do better.
Were you like in high school looking forward to going to college, or what were your ambitions at the time?
Oh, no. No. I had been in torment for a long time. And when I was 12, I found a little bit of weed that my dad had stashed in the garage and a pipe. And a buddy and I went over to the lake right by us, and we sat down under a tree and on the bank of the lake, and we smoked a bowl of weed. And it was the most amazing thing that ever happened to me. It was this peace and quiet, and all the noise in my head and the thoughts and the turmoil just settled down quietly. And it was the most wonderful thing. I'd found, the answer to everything. And so then I was like, I need more of this. And so I spent a couple of years searching, couldn't find it, because I'm in 6th grade, 7th and 8th grade. And then
a lot harder to come by back then.
Well, 6th and 7th and 8th grade it was. The summer before my freshman year of high school, I went to summer school.
Well, a 6th grader now could get weed.
Yes.
It wouldn't take them years. It would take them maybe a couple of minutes.
Yeah. No, but it was, I went to the high school, to Royal High School, and at lunch over at the pizza place, it was open campus. There were joint dealers, nickel dealers, dime dealers, 20 dealers. I mean, it was everywhere. You just had to turn around. I mean, they were standing everywhere, the dealers. So from that point, at the age of 14, I was stoned. And I don't say this exaggerating. I was stoned around the clock till I was 31.
Wow.
It was, from morning till night, every day. And of course, that initial cure-all amazing thing, diminishes, as everything does, the law of diminishing returns. But, it still kept me kind of more stabilized, and it took all of the edge off of the anxiety and depression. And
when did you leave the house?
It wasn't really an event. I'd stay at friends' places. My best friend, when I was like 17, he was a Vietnam vet, so quite a bit older, and I'd hang out at his house and crash there, or crash at my sister's. So it really wasn't one thing. It was, I'd stay here for a while, there for a while, drift around, go back home for a while. I think when I got my own place, I don't know, I was probably probably around 20, I'm guessing.
And were you still an atheist at that time?
Oh, yeah. I remained an atheist until I was What was I? 22.
Okay. And when did you? Because I know you work on. Sorry, remind me. You work on
Recreational vehicles.
RVs. Okay. Is that something you taught yourself, just as
It was a guy at the
get
Mormon
by, or?
church when I was 16. A guy at the Mormon church had a little tent trailer dealership and said he
Okay.
needed someone to work for the summer. And I was like, I need money for weed. So
Yeah.
I went to work for him. And at 16 and by 17, I'd become the service manager.
Yeah.
I just picked it up like that. I was really good at it really fast.
Mm-hmm.
And then dropped out of high school when I was 17. So about halfway, I spent about a half of my junior year walking stoned from class to class. And that was all I did. And when I'd show up, and I'd only show up maybe once or twice a week. And then I dropped out to do this, to work full time. And then when I was 18, I got a job at a real shop, a big RV shop.
Okay, so 22, that's when you're introduced to evangelicalism?
Yeah.
And how'd that happen?
I don't know how long we want to go here. It's a story.
Okay, I've got time.
You know what? I'll
Yeah.
cut to the shorter version, because then nobody will buy my book if I tell you everything, right?
We'll plug the book. Yeah, plug the book. What, just real quick, do we know when the book's coming out?
I was just sending a citation over to the editor. It was the only citation she required on one page.
Okay.
It was a funny story. I was citing when Jerome translated the Septuagint, and at the end where Jonah is sitting under that bush, it's called a gourd in the Septuagint. Well, Jerome was going off the Hebrew, and he thought an ivy was a better translation of that word from the Hebrew, and so he translated ivy. So Augustine wrote him a letter and said on Sunday, when that was read to the church and they said ivy, there was a riot in the city.
Wow.
Which to me, it goes to the point of the idea that Middle Eastern Christians are playing fast and loose with their beliefs. This one word,
Right,
but anyway, so yeah, it's as soon as she's done just formatting the chapter headings.
Okay, so give us the teaser then of what's going to be in your book on how you came to evangelicalism.
Okay. Basically, I had an upstairs neighbor who was a stoner, and he was a Christian, and he had been out on the road, and you're kind of a few times you're kind of freezing and then going and freezing and going. My internet looks pretty good, so I don't know if you have an issue on your end or if I do, but I'm just letting you know.
Okay.
So anyway, he had been on the road as a truck driver the whole time we lived there, but I knew his wife. We got to know her because she was a pot smoker too, and I'd score weed for her, and and then and you have to read the book, what I consider clearly divine, miraculous events. He ended up coming home from the road right when I was about to leave the place.
I'm still here.
Okay.
Still here.
Yeah, when I was about to leave the place, and we ended up meeting, and I sat down with him and asked him some questions, and he was able to answer them to my satisfaction, some of the challenges I had with God allowing evil. And then he started, I said, okay, well, now I want you to tell me what you think this book says. And so as he started going through it, I'd stop him and say, show me that. And he'd flip right to the page and show me. And I'd go, okay. Then he'd continue talking and go, show me that. He'd flip right to the page in the Bible and read it to me. And so I did this about 4 or 5 times to make sure what he's given me is what's in the book. Now I'm like, okay, now I can sit back and listen. And it had a very great impact on me, that it made more sense of everything than any other explanation I'd ever heard. And so I ended up converting and becoming an evangelical Christian. Although I never went to a church. We just had Bible study at his house 7 nights a week, like 3 to 6 hours a night for months and months. but that's how I became an evangelical Christian. There's a lot more to the story on how I ended up being stuck in the place and what I consider and the actual events that happened when I prayed the prayer, as it were. Some really amazing things happened.
Okay, so how long were you evangelical? And I think kind of the next big chapter of your life is, correct me if I'm wrong, is you have a divorce, and then you end up running the seating at a large nationally televised church, right?
Yeah, so I was an evangelical Christian in belief ever since. But after, I don't know, a little less than a year, there was a issue that happened between us and a parting of ways. And then I slipped slowly back into my old world and didn't really, that culminated. Now this is at around, 22, 23. And then around 31 is when the divorce happened, when everything came apart. And that's when I first walked into a church and said, I think I need the support of church community to do this. And so I did. And
that's when you stopped the weed.
Yeah. And you know what?
Around the same time?
It wasn't, like, oh, this is evil, I need to stop it. It was in the midst of the torment that I was going through inside with the divorce. I sat down and smoked a bowl and it didn't do anything. It didn't help. And so it was like, if it's not helping, why am I doing it? And it was like, it was rather shocking that it didn't help. But then there was like, what's the point? And so I put it down.
I think a lot of people, when they're kind of, and I'm not speaking for you, but I'm just talking about divorces in general and those kind of rough times, do the opposite, fall further and further away from the church as opposed to let's walk into a church now. What do you think happened at that time that made you?
My mom had these very close friends in England. And I think they were unable to have a kid. And then finally, miraculously, she got pregnant and they had this son. And he was the most amazing, brilliant, intelligent, academic, athletic, amazing young man. And when he was, I don't know, like 14 or something, getting out of the tub, his towel hit the electric heater on the wall and electrocuted him and he died on the floor.
Jeez.
And the woman who had been devoutly religious turned atheist, and the man who was atheistic turned religious. So I think that, these traumatic events very often can kind of flip you maybe in either direction.
Right. Okay, so you enter a church again. And I'm just curious because it sounds like you didn't really get like formal higher education. Obviously, from anyone who knows you, you're a critical thinker, highly intellectual. Were you doing something in your 20s and 30s when you weren't smoking pot to like stimulate your brain? Were you like reading a bunch of books or?
No, I've only read very few books in my life, ever. So no, my formal education really ended at the end of 8th grade. Because after that, I was just stoned and I floated along a little on what I already knew. I had tested out graduating high school level on all the English stuff and 10th grade on math when I was in 6th grade. So I kind of floated through a couple of years without doing anything, never read anything, never did anything. And then after that, I just dropped out and went, to work. And no, I had no interest in any of that. It was just, it kind of just became, as far as the things I do know, it always to me starts with a question. And this is what I always tell the young cops. When that question pops up, I wonder if what the church says about this, or I wonder what God thinks about that, or I wonder whatever. And then you go, I don't know. Oh, well, let's see what's on the next YouTube video. No, it's like if you just, especially now that you have Google, go find the answer to that question.
Yeah.
And then that, I promise you, will bring up more questions. And then you go find the answers to those questions. I think a lot of what I learned was in debating on the internet with, very many of them atheists and agnostics. And
on forums?
Yes, on
Mm.
MySpace. And they, to this
You've been doing
day,
it ever since MySpace.
those were the most brilliant atheists I'd ever met. And that's
Mm,
including all the big names. These people were better. These
really?
people were so sharp. And so I tell people, if you want to know what you need to know about your religion, an atheist will dedicate his life to telling you. you
Oh
know,
yeah, I know a few.
yeah, and you can use that to your advantage.
Yeah.
So I went there to gain the challenges to my faith, to
Mm,
find out what do I need to know. And so I get their challenges and I'd go, okay. And once you kind of step a few steps into like apologetics, you start learning what all the names are, who all the people are. So then you're like, okay, here's this challenge. Well, this person over here deals with that. And I'd order a book, but I wouldn't read the book. I'm just going to read a chapter, or I'm going to
mm.
dig in and find the answer to my question. And then I'll go respond to the person. And then he'd come back. And this went on for 2 years, 4 to 8 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Yeah.
And this is kind of how I learned the things I know, is just by seeking out the answers to the questions I have. And they would give you the questions and the challenges. And then I'd challenge their worldviews and see how do they stand up? What evidence is there for their worldviews being true? And how do they stand up when you take those actual beliefs and go apply them in different places all over in the world and say, does this work?
It takes a lot of intellectual humility, I think, to honestly engage in those kind of debates. Because what I see is people get more entrenched into the identity they already have for themselves. Like if they are an atheist, they'll dig and find the answer that supports their position, and the
Well,
Christian
I
will
can't say
and
I
then
didn't
people.
do that. I can't
Yeah.
say I didn't do that. I think we all, well, you know what? Yeah, I'm not even going to say I think. I know we all have a confirmation bias. Everybody.
Mhm.
There are
Yeah.
things we want to be true. We have a lot invested in them. Of course, we want them to be true.
Right.
So, yeah, well, I think what it takes more than anything is courage,
Mm.
because every time I'd go to that keyboard, I was terrified. What am I going to get? Because I got rocked hard all the time. I
Yeah.
got rocked hard by questions and challenges. And then I'd go research and I'm like, oh, and now I was on more solid footing than before. So you
Mhm.
got your faith as it stands, and then it gets whacked hard and knocked down. And then you keep going and find the answer. And now you're actually more stable than before you heard the question. But this is a repetitive cycle that goes on and on and on. And then finally, after a year or so, you start feeling a little more comfortable.
Mhm.
Like, okay, whatever the challenge is, I know there is a good answer out there before you even find it. You're pretty sure there's a good answer.
To this day, if you get a question, do you still wanna find the answer? Because I feel sometimes, I've kinda gone through that process a little bit but I got to the point where I don't really care anymore, like, whatever, like, challenge my faith, whatever, I don't have to prove it to you. Um, I don't think that's a good place to be honest, because it's kinda lazy.
I
Um,
think my objective was it wasn't to bolster my own faith, it was to be able to share the gospel with people.
mm,
So, it's like here I'm in my shop, and what you can't see over here is, boxes and boxes of tools, big chests full of tools. I have a lot of equipment. So if you need something fixed, somebody needs something fixed, and God says, okay, I'm going to send you over to this guy because he's got the right tools to fix it. Well, God's going to
mhm,
probably send you more people if you got more equipment.
mm,
So, for me, it was being able to answer questions. So I can sit down with people from many different beliefs, or, atheists, or uh, evangelicals looking into, which form of Christianity or whatever.
yeah.
And I can sit down with them. And for the most part, I can answer their questions intelligently. And if somebody's honestly seeking, I think I can help them along the way because of the answers I found. So I think that's the bigger point than me feeling smug and secure about my own faith. I
Mhm,
think is being able to help somebody else who, I got to say that, if you're born a cradle Copt, evangelism typically isn't very forefront in your thinking, because, you come from a country where you lose your head if you go around evangelizing, and everybody's born into the church. But here in America, I kind of smack the young cops around when I talk to them. And I say, you're walking around in a world full of people who are perishing and suffering, and you're holding the answer, and you don't care. You're just concerned about your college degree. You don't care about these suffering people because you keep this faith to yourself. Nobody even knows you're a Copt. My gosh, I'm an American biker, and nobody knows me more than 30 minutes and doesn't know I'm a Coptic Christian. I will find a way to slip it in there somewhere to let them know what I am. And then if they have questions, then we'll continue the conversation. And if they don't, I'm done. But I'm at least going to lay it out there. This is what I am. So if you do have questions, you're going to ask.
Right. Okay. Yeah, you're kind of more inviting questions or
Yes.
giving opportunities as opposed to, hey, did you go to Easter this Sunday? Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's a big difference. I think a lot of cops think when you think evangelism, they think I've got to, quote the gospel and do all this fancy stuff. I don't think that's really the case.
Well, the more well articulated you are, the better off you're going to be if you're going to talk about it.
Right.
But the way you get better at it is by talking about it. So you start the engagement process, the person throws something at you and you don't know an answer. And you're like, you know what? That's a really good question. I don't know. But you know what? I'm going to look into it and get back to you. That's how the process works. But you got to step into the process, because not only in that process are you learning the answers to the questions they have, but you're learning how to communicate them and how to connect and engage with people on these subjects.
Yeah. And did you get better at that over time, or did that
much
naturally to you? Yeah.
No. Much better over time. I'm naturally extremely antisocial. I mean, to clinical levels of antisocial. Like,
I wouldn't have guessed
problems.
it.
Yeah.
Okay, so you went through this period of robust question asking, it sounds like. What questions did you ask yourself? What questions were arising as you went back to the Protestant church that kind of stimulated you to somehow end up at a Coptic church?
Oh, that was that was very simple. How did we get the Bible?
How did we get the Bible?
We had a group that was mostly college, but some high school and even in a couple of junior high school kids at our church that we met every Friday night for what we call theology night. And we discussed some theology or apologetics subject. And it was 3 hours every week. And then usually it would be 3 more hours. When people say young people can't pay attention, that's just not true. They don't want to sit there and listen to you lecture them for 3 hours. But if you sit down and engage in conversation with them, I do this all the time at parishes. And whenever I say, okay, open subject, whatever you want to talk about, it usually goes 2.5 to 3.5 hours. So yeah, so we did this, and one of the young ladies asked me, where'd we get our Bible? And I knew I had a book on the shelf that I'd never read by F.F. Bruce. And I said, well, here, I got this book. Why don't you go read it, and then you come teach us how we got our Bible? And a couple months later, she handed me the book back and said, no. And so it fell back to me. And then I did, I don't know, it took me like 3 months of going through the book several times to prepare teaching. It took me 18 hours to teach it with a 32-page handout. And it was
Wait, who are you teaching it to for 18 hours?
This is the group. It took
the same group?
6 of our nights of our 3-hour sessions.
Wow.
And, it introduced me to the early church, because in Protestantism, typically, there's this idea that, and especially in evangelicalism, that the church was established by the apostles who were holy and pure and everything was great. And then at some point, it all went apostate and got screwed up, and that's the Catholics, and now they're restoring it.
Yeah.
But when you try to pinpoint when did it go wrong, very often they'll point to Constantine. When it became legal is when things got corrupted. But if you look at the actual beliefs, if you're saying that places where your beliefs are different than ours are the places of corruption, then no, we got to predate Constantine. We got to go back to like right after the last apostle died. Everything went screwed up and apostate all over the world in all the independent churches at the same time and in the same way. And that just isn't reasonable.
Yeah.
So just getting introduced to the early church. I'm sorry, I'm getting over a cold, so I got a little bit of a cough.
Oh yeah, sorry to hear that.
So after getting introduced to the early church through the canon of scripture, then that pointed me towards, wanting to know more about this early church. And it's so funny because in the Coptic world, we have, Coptic church, or now we have American Coptic Orthodox Church, and, these different names. I would have never walked into that building because I'd never met an Orthodox person that I knew was Orthodox when I walked in. The reason I walked into that building was because it said See of Alexandria. And my historical introduction, I saw the See of Alexandria was the intellectual capital of the world. Wow. It was the seat of Saint Athanasius, who gave us the first list of books of the Bible that we have today in his 367 festal letter. So I knew all about Alexandria. I was hearing about this city. This was like this hub of Christian thought, and Origen, who was the first great philosopher who engaged with the pagan world, with our religion. And, so I'm like, Sea of Alexandria. Okay, that's where I'm going to go and start learning about the early church. And if it didn't say that on the building, I would have never gone in there.
And wait, so did you do like Google research or anything before?
No, it was a local church, and it was just in big letters on the side of the building.
Okay.
St. John Church in West Covina, or in St. John Church in Covina.
So you knew that church existed. Your studies had led you to come across the earlier church and the Sea of Alexandria, and then the two just clicked?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I said, this is a good place to start.
Because I've had some people come to St. Mark's, and I'm like, how did you guys end up here? And they're just like, we just Googled Orthodox Church or something like that. So you didn't do that. That's interesting.
Now, and people in the area, I'll call it the mosque.
Oh, they do?
Yeah, it has the big.
Why? There's a big cross dome.
I know, but they don't know the difference. I had a priest tell me he was talking to some woman in a supermarket, and she goes, "Oh, are you Muslim?" And he's a priest, and he's like, "No, look at the cross." And so he explains everything to her, what a Coptic Christian is. So when he's all done explaining it, she goes, "So then you're a Christian Muslim?"
Yeah, people are funny. I was walking the other day with a big cross around my neighborhood, and someone I just say hello to here and there. He doesn't really know me, but he's like, "Assalamu alaikum," and I was like, and he's like, "Oh no, you're Christian." I'm like, "Yeah." So yeah, people are funny, but okay, so you go in there, and wait, how old are you at this time? So this is.
Well, it was just at this point 11 years ago. I was 46.
Okay.
I think it's not 46, yeah.
And you had already met your current wife, Anastasia?
Oh yeah, we'd been married for some time.
You've been married already. All right.
Yeah, almost 10 years.
Okay.
And she was also very adamant in her faith, very zealous. When we went to churches, people kind of knew us as the zealous ones. I even had my last pastor would run his sermon notes by me to have them check the theology, to make sure there were no theological errors in his sermons. Really? Yeah.
How theological did the sermons actually get at the Protestant church?
Not too.
Yeah.
It's funny. Before we did this, before we even were introduced to Orthodoxy, my wife, just reading St. Paul and women covering their heads for prayer, she would wear a scarf, and when everybody would close their eyes to pray, she would secretly pull it over her head and pray, and then pull it off when they, so because you have to actually hide it, because you'll be called legalistic if you do it. So she would actually secretly cover her head when she prayed, and this was before she knew anything of Orthodoxy.
But Protestants do have their kind of very important sticking points that do differentiate them, right? Like predestination and kind of all these concepts, right? So was that something?
That's a particular to Calvinism.
Okay.
So if you want to look at the more common general ones, you got to kind of peel Lutheranism off, because it's kind of closer to Catholicism. So the places where we would not be compatible with Lutheranism would be all of the five solas of Luther. But if you want to talk about just the common religion of America, evangelicalism, there you're going to some core issues. Baptism and what is it? And communion and what is it? Salvation, how is it obtained? Authority and how is it passed on and possessed? These things are completely incompatible, to the point where, I tell people that these aren't the same religion. They're really not. You can't call an anti-sacramental religion the same as a sacramental religion. They're different.
Right.
And it's not to say to put anybody down. It's just to make a clarification that you can't just go by, well, they agree with the church councils. Well, the church councils only really defined what we believed in areas that were in dispute. Trust me, if anybody had claimed, the communion wasn't the body and blood of Christ, it would be in the creed and it would be in the council. But it never happened. Nobody ever questioned.
Yeah, fair point. Yeah. Okay, so you walk into St. John's not knowing what to expect, and what happened on that day? Do you remember?
Some things I really appreciated. The first thing so when I first walked up, I said, I walked in. See, okay, I was new. I didn't know anything about Egyptians, and so I showed up on time. And I actually showed up early. I didn't know better, and I've repented. But
did you know what a liturgy was at that point before you?
No, I just knew it was a church service.
Okay.
And I showed up early, and there were like 3 or 4 people there. And
on a weekday or Sunday?
No, on a Sunday.
On Sunday.
Yeah. And so I kind of told the lady what I was there to do, and I wanted to learn about this early church. I'm an evangelical, blah, blah, blah. And she says, oh, talk to Father Daniel. He's the young priest with the black beard. He's not here yet, but he's coming. You talk to him. So I went and I waited out on the steps. And then up comes this guy, this big black muumuu, and, big black beard. And I'm like, I'm thinking that's the guy. And so I tell him what I'm there to do and what I want to learn. And I'll never forget the exchange. He says, well, stick around for a while, see if you like it. And I looked at him and I said, how I like it has nothing to do with anything. If it's untrue and I love it, I'm leaving. And if it's absolutely true and I hate it, I have to conform to it. I'm looking for what's true. I'm not looking for what I like. And this was probably.
You actually verbalized that, or that was in your head?
No. This is what I told him.
You told him that?
Yeah. What I like is, I remember I told him, what I like is utterly irrelevant. I'm here to find out if it's true.
Yeah.
And so then the first thing that hit me was there was nobody greeting me at the door. I walk in and the liturgy's going on, and there's, they're starting the liturgy. Nobody's facing me. Nobody up front is facing me. Everybody is facing the altar. Nobody had to tell me what that meant. I knew what that meant. It meant that I'm not the customer. I'm not the important one in the room that you have to cater everything toward and direct everything to me. God is the center of attention, not me. And I loved that part. Absolutely loved it. And then I looked where the lecterns were, and they were off to the 2 sides. And nobody had to tell me what that meant. I knew instinctively. God stays in the middle. You speak from off to the side. And that's why when I see some of the Coptic priests trying to be hip and cool, walking back and forth with the mic like a timeshare salesman, trying to be, relevant, it makes my skin crawl. It's like you're walking in front of the altar. They put that podium on the side for a reason. You go stand over on the side. You're not the center here. God's the center. You stay on the side where you belong, because that's really why it's set up that way. And there's a reason why this is addressed to you from the podium, and everything is pointing to God during the liturgy. And so these things were kind of just obvious to me why they were this way. So initially, I loved some of the form, the structure, some of the symbolism. It was long.
Yeah, it still is.
It was really long.